Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to your Scottish Parliament. My name is Brian Whittle, MSP, and I am a Director of Scotland Future Forum. And I want to welcome you to the Festival of Politics 2025, and it is a special 20-year anniversary of Scotland's Futures Forum. Today we turn our attention to the future of health, specifically how innovation in preventative care and well-being are reshaping Scotland's health landscape. And I have to say, an unashamed plug here, this is really my topic, and it's very timely because I published a document last week on this very topic, and it's the raison d'etre really why I got into politics in the first place, and how we discuss health and how we change the way in which we discuss health and tackle health in this country. So I'm really excited today to introduce our panel today, and it brings together experts in community-led health, digital innovation, public policy and health equity to explore how technology, systems thinking and grassroots approach can work together to improve outcomes and reduce inequalities. We were just talking earlier on, and just as an aside, the difference in health expectancy across Scotland between the wealthy and those in more poor communities can be greater than 10 years. But the healthy life expectancy is greater than 20 years. So that's something we should consider as we go forward. So I'm very pleased to be joined by John Cassidy, Volunteer Chair of Scottish Community for Health and Wellbeing Group, who are an alliance of community-led health organisations working to improve health and reduce inequalities across Scotland. Welcome, John. Alison Catalano, Fellow of the Fraser-Vallance Institute, whose work focuses on employment policy and health inequality in Scotland, including research with the Scottish Health Equity Research Unit. Welcome, Alison. Dr. Margaret Douglas, a consultant in public health medicine at Public Health Scotland and honorary clinical senior lecturer at University of Glasgow. Her work focuses on understanding and improving the ways in which wider policies affect health and health inequalities. Welcome to you. And finally to Chal Chut, Chief Technology Officer and Digital Health and Care Innovation Centre, who leads on digital strategy and championing citizens' empowerment through technology and systems thinking in health and care transformation. Now, I look forward to a thoughtful and engaging discussion today, and it's important that everyone feels welcome to share their views, even where our opinions may differ. Let's ensure we listen to one another with respect and create a space where all contributions are valued. We'll begin with opening reflections from each of our panellists, followed by a discussion exploring key themes, and then we'll open the floor to you for your questions and insights. And if you happen to be keen to share your thoughts on socials, you can do so by using @VisitScottParl and @ScottFutures on X, and on Instagram @ScottParl. I should also add that this event is being recorded and will be available on the Scottish Parliament and Future Forum's YouTube channel in a few weeks. So, to set the scene, let's start by hearing from each of our panellists on what do you see as the most promising innovations in preventative care and well-being, and how might they reshape our approach to health over the next decade? So a nice easy one to start with. Margaret, do you want to start us off?
I will, thank you. But I've agreed with Brian that I'll start off with just a little bit of audience participation. I hope that's okay. So I'm going to ask you all a question. And the question is about what do you think makes the biggest difference to health in Scotland? Is it socio-economic circumstances? Is it the physical environment, air quality, things like that? Is it health-related behaviours, physical activity, diet, nutrition, that kind of thing? Or is it healthcare? Is it the NHS? So a raise of hands, please, for those who think the thing that makes the biggest difference is socio-economic conditions. Oh, lots of people. That's great. Thank you very much. Hands for the physical environment? Nobody thinks the physical environment. One hand, thank you. How about hands for health-related behaviours, physical activity, substance use? Great, thank you. And then finally, the NHS, healthcare. Who thinks healthcare services are the thing that makes the biggest difference? Great, thank you very much for participating in that. And of course, you're all right. All of those things definitely make a difference to health in Scotland. And it was actually a bit of a trick question because those things are not independent. They all relate to each other. It's obvious, isn't it, that your social circumstances have a big impact on your health-related behaviour and the kind of environments that you're exposed to, and even on sometimes on your access to healthcare services. So those things are not independent at all. But if you were to try and tease out what kind of difference do each of those things make, 40% of the difference to health is socioeconomic factors. About 10% is physical environment, about 30% is health-related behaviours, and about what's left, 20% is healthcare services. So what that means is if we want to make a difference to health, if we want a preventive system, we have to work across the whole system. It's not just the NHS. In public health, we talk about the building blocks of health, and that is the physical, social and economic environment in which we all live, work and grow. And it's the building blocks of health that really make the biggest difference to health. And if we want a preventive system that is going to improve health in the next 10, 20 more years, we really need to ensure that everybody has access to positive building blocks of health. And we can't do that on our own within the NHS, not even in public health, in Public Health Scotland. We need to work with people who are working in housing, transport, the economy, education, a really important one, all of these other sectors. And so what a preventive system looks like is very good joined up partnership work across that whole system. And I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. Ciao.
Great answer. Now I've got to follow that. I'm a Chief Technology Officer for a Digital Innovation Centre, and everyone thinks I'm going to talk about really sexy technology, but I'm not. The obvious stuff that people look at when they see these things is what we call the sexy stuff: robots, genomics, drones, AI. These are all the kind of, obviously sexy technologies, and it's good that we're innovating in those spaces, and we're creating new types of drugs that can be tailored to your genes and things like that, and that's going to make massive, advancements in the way we all live. But to your point, it's 20% of our lives that we're putting all that effort into, and 20% of the outcomes that we're going to get from it. And so a lot of our work as an innovation centre is trying to rebalance that. Full disclosure, I'm public health by background before this job, so I would say that. For example, historically, the reason we all have thought of the NHS as the place where we get health from is because in previous eras, the NHS has been the one that holds our record and has all the knowledge about all the things that matter to us. A GP holds our records, our test results, and all these sorts of other things. And so the power has been localized in some of these institutions because that was the only way to do it. I guess the thing I would encourage people to think about when you think about digital is not the sexy stuff, it's the fact that it can democratize our ability to work in partnership. So it would be the case that there's no reason that your records are only held by the NHS. You could hold them, and you could bring them with you and use them to make life easier. I'll do my own show of hands. How many people have had to repeat the same story to multiple bits of the system to try and persuade people of your needs? Okay, that is number one chief challenge that citizens give to us as an innovation centre, and we work with thousands of citizens every year to hear what they need and what they want. And the number one thing they say is, I want to tell my story once. I don't want to have to repeat myself. I want for the system to tailor what I get based on my story. So that would be my chief thing I talk about is, let's not worry too much about the sexy stuff. Let's not invest in sharpening the tip of the spear while the handle's falling apart. Let's make sure we can make it so that we can empower people, the public, their unpaid carers, their informal circle of care, their communities, their local leisure services, their housing system, and health and care professionals can all work in partnership. It's the same call. The digital is just going to make that easier as long as we bring everyone with us. And that means building in lots of assisted access for people who aren't going to uptake digital well themselves. and creating trustworthiness in the digital services, which means that people want control. They don't want to feel like things are being done to them. They want to know who's using the data and for what reasons. So trust, inclusion, and getting the basics right around making sure that your story can be told once.
Thank you. John, what's your take?
Hello. You know, I'm about to demonstrate where I was before I retired. Guess what I was doing? Any guesses? Teacher. So, you know, you can't take the teacher out of a person. So when I come to talk to people, I still bring stuff. You know, I think I'm the only panelist. Anybody else got stuff with them? Nah, I've got stuff with me. I have to stand up when I'm speaking. My wife doesn't like that, though. Anyway, I am a retired person. I've been retired now for 16 years, and on that 16 years, I've been involved with small and medium community-led health improvement organisations. And currently, I am chair of an organisation called Scottish Communities for Health and Wellbeing. I don't know if you've heard of us. We are an organisation kind of odd. And see, when we apply for funding, all the funders think we're kind of odd because we've no staff, no premises, and we bring in lots of money to communities, not to us. And the board, I'm the chair of the board. The board is made up of volunteers from different community organisations in Scotland, and they're a terrific bunch of people. I'm going to get pulled off with a big thing here because I'm going to go on too long, aren't I?
Fire on.
And that organisation has now existed since about 2008-9 and arose from it was from the end of a big lottery funding, 5 years of lottery funding. And just about that time, trust your luck, the world financial markets crashed, 2008 and 9. And we looked round the healthy living centres that were still existing and said, oh gosh, trouble at Mill. There's no money. Nobody's got any money. You know, the grants dried up and they were doing fantastic things, as they still are. And what we did was got in touch with the Cabinet Secretary at that time, who happened to be Nicola Sturgeon, and a bunch of us from Healthy Living Centres went in to see her. Credit to her, she asked us in to this building, and we sat for an hour and a half. After she said when we arrived, and this is typical of now, we've no money. What are you doing here? We've no money, and any money we have, we give to the health boards and to the local authorities. You need to go and talk to them. And then we, of course, kept talking. And she had a healthy living centre in her constituency, which was very favourable because it was a very good one. And she said, you don't need to convince me about healthy living centres. I know how good they are and the impact they have on local communities. That was good. And you know this? She said to the civil servants, go see if you can find some money for a transition fund. They found £2.5 million. But we're bold. We are bold. The next year, we said, financial crisis ain't over. We came back again. And you wouldn't believe it. She found another £2.5 million. And that funding saved a lot of healthy living centres till this day. Since that time, we've been on a roller coaster. Our organisation, which is made up of it's now 85, 86 community organisations. We are it. They're not members. That is what the organisation is, 86 community-led organisations. We're at the point now, we've gone through about 16 years, maybe certainly 16 years of roller coaster. about the role of community-led organisations and in health improvement. The momentum has been building. We've had a few tipping points along the way. Some of you will have heard of the Christie Commission, which keeps coming up in a lot of discussions, a lot of research reports. It was fabulous. It laid the groundwork for involving community-led organisations in improving health and well-being across Scotland. Another tipping point we had about that time was publications of a book called Utilisation Focused Evaluation. That's a bit easy, isn't it? Utilisation focused evaluation, it changed my board's whole view of what we should be doing, what we should be looking at.
I'm reaching.
Aye, I'm just finishing. And there's a few other tipping points I'd like to talk to you about, but maybe in the questions we'll get to them. We're at the point now, one of our big tipping points, this is my very last point, it better be, he says. This document we published this year, it's the second version of it, loads and loads of people involved in shaping it. It's called A Blueprint for a Healthier Scotland, and it's from our organisation, Scottish Communities for Health and Wellbeing. It seeks to answer the question, we've read lots of wonderful statements about the role of community organisation. The question at the end is, how? How do we do all these fabulous things? We try to answer it in this. Thanks.
Alison.
Hi, I'm Alison Catalano, and I'm an economist. And I've been an economist for about 5 years. A lot of the work that I do has a lot of overlap with what Margaret was talking about, but where she gave a very beautiful, well laid out overview of what it looks like for the whole system. I work in kind of a narrow slice of that. I end up doing a lot of work on some environmental stuff, but mostly on employment. Kind of inform that choice on my behalf. Prior to becoming an economist, I used to be a restaurant general manager. I did that for about 10 years. In 2020, I had 70 employees, and then one day I had 0 employees. That was a very interesting time to be working as a manager of a lot of people. And what you see, when you're running a business is you see how actively health and work interact with each other. And becoming an economist, you see this on a really large scale. Health and work are really fundamental to each other. Employment begets income. People on higher incomes are generally in better health. Why are people not in work then? Sometimes it has to do with the fact that, can we not work because of our health? Are we in poor health because we can't work? Are we in poor health and are we not working at the same time alongside each other? Yes to all of the above. When we're talking about people who are not able to access jobs because of health. And it's a really interesting problem in Scotland. There's been a lot of reporting about the number of people who aren't in work because of their health. A big part of the problem is that our statistics are quite bad. So for me, a person who works on statistics, who sits in a computer and types away at things, we don't really know how many people are not able to access work because of their health. And that's a huge problem because these two are so fundamental to each other. People having good quality jobs, meaning jobs that are stable, jobs that are consistent, jobs that are safe, and jobs that are, in some way fulfilling, hugely, hugely, hugely impacts our physical and mental well-being. But without that knowledge, who is not in work, how can we target policies to get them into work? How can we target policies to improve their lives, to improve their incomes, and to improve, again, overall, the health of the country? I think that's my piece.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's your panel. I think you'll agree we've got most bases covered here. So I'll just go into a few questions more. Now, Margaret, you in your introduction, you talked about this sort of wider approach than just health. So I wonder if you could elaborate what you mean by that. And we discussed earlier on. You said the best time to start this was 10 years ago. It's, but we are where we are. So if we change that approach and if we look at the more holistic approach, what is a good system look like in 10, 20 years time?
Okay, well, I spoke about the building blocks of health, and I think the biggest shift we need to make is actually a mind shift. It is a mindset shift to stop thinking about health as being all within the purview of the NHS and understand that it's a system-wide issue. The health outcomes that we see in the population are the outcomes of everything that happens across society, not just what happens in the NHS. So having that mindset shift is the first shift, and that's more challenging than you think. Even when people see the evidence, somehow they just kind of drift back to, well, it's all about individuals and what they do and what the NHS does. So I think that is the first shift that we need to see. And then we need to see much more joined up working across the whole of the public sector, but also the private sector and the voluntary sector. I think the voluntary sector, as John has demonstrated, has a really, really powerful role to play in this. So it's about having a clear, shared understanding of those. And it's also about using data and evidence to understand how can we get the best outcomes for the citizens of Scotland from our housing policies, from transport, from the planning policies that we have. Often, all of those policies can be good for health or bad for health, and there are things that we can do to understand how can we make sure we do get the best value. And the thing that underpins all of that, of course, is the economy. So Alison talked about the importance of employment for health. There's no question that employment, good quality employment, is really important for health. But the shape of the economy is important for health as well. How do we share the benefits? Over the past, 25 years or so in Scotland, we have seen almost continuous economic growth, almost, apart from a couple of years, the pandemic and the credit crunch. So we've seen that in real terms, the average GDP has gone up, and yet poverty has remained pretty much exactly the same overall. So we're doing something wrong. We're not using our economy in a way that reduces poverty and allows everybody to thrive and everybody to benefit from it. So I think looking at all of those different areas, it's a bit mind-blowing when you start to think about everything that affects health and what you might do about it, but that is what we need to do. And then the final thing I wanted to say in that is it's also really important to focus on the early years. So support for young children, support for education, and also support for parents. It's kind of obvious, isn't it, for prevention? We need to start early, and we need to make sure we put in the best support for children and young people. And again, there's lots of evidence that shows that that's where you get the best outcomes for your investment. So if you really want to get the best return, you start early. So I think looking across the whole economy, working with all of those policies that affect the building blocks of health, and working particularly on early childhood and young people, that's where we're going to get the best return. And that's, to me, that's what a whole health system would look like.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Now, Chal, you intimated to us there, when we think about healthcare technology, there's obviously the big discussions around AI. There's, we've all got wearable tech these days. But you talked more about the simplicity of what technology can do in terms of the background work. So, I think I should say I did come out of healthcare tech before coming into politics. I think my frustration has always been Scotland's ability to adopt technology is behind the curve compared to even compared to down south, which isn't very good, and we compare it to places like Estonia and Germany and places like that. So, what are the opportunities? What is technology? What opportunities does technology give us, and where are the challenges in the next sort of 10 to 15 years?
Yeah. So a few things. The first thing is, when I'm speaking to an MSP, you get what you pay for, and so if you look at the digital and technology investment in public services, in particular the NHS in Scotland, somewhere in the region of, depends on who you talk to, 1.5% to about 3% of the overall turnover. If you went into mainland Europe, you'd find that it was nearer to 6%. If you went into any other industry, you'd find it would be in the region of 9 to 10%. And so I have to say this on behalf of all the frontline practitioners and doctors and nurses and everyone else, they're logging on to old machines and having to fight against technology quite a lot of the time in order to get anything done. So that's like as an absolute basic level thing here, which is, I think, as a dialogue here, which is very difficult to have politically and socially, which is we need more budget for the basic technology, and that might mean fewer nurses, because there's an opportunity cost with every budget decision you make, but it might make every nurse more effective, happier in their job, and able to support more people. And we will never, ever not need more nurses, but we have opportunities to give them better tools that allow them to do more with what we do have. And so that's a quite difficult conversation to have, because you're effectively saying, I'm going to take away these people, and I'm going to put this tech in its place. But the tech is a force multiplier for how effective people can be. We've seen that in most other walks of life to some degree. So that's a difficult conversation to have. Another example would be we need to see every single person as an asset, as a contributor, whereas unfortunately a lot of the way our systems work is I'm a piece of meat in the sausage machine, and I kind of go from step to step being told what to do next, and I just kind of follow the process. I'm an asset. I could be contributing. We have 800,000 unpaid carers in Scotland who between themselves account for more economic value for healthcare delivery than the NHS does. Okay, so, and that's only the ones we know about. The informal networks, the charities, all these groups vastly outweighs what public services do in terms of healthcare delivery. So the question I would have is, how do we equip them to do more? I've been involved in quite a few small charities myself as a trustee and as a worker, and they don't have any investment in infrastructure and technology particularly. It's very difficult for them to help more than a few hundred people in their local community when they could be helping thousands if we gave them the right kind of tools. One last kind of thought about me being an asset as a contributor. Just a very quick story. My son has extremely severe wheat allergy, so touch him with bread and we're off to sick kids, anaphylactic shock and all these sorts of things. And it took us about 10 appointments across 3 different disciplines to get a diagnosis, get EpiPens, and up until that happened, the system, I don't mean that the NHS, I mean nursery, school, other parents, restaurants, no one took us seriously. We were just fussy parents, and we went to sick kids 9 times in a year for injections and all the rest of it. And I will never forget, we eventually got the consultant who had a special interest in respiratory medicine and allergies, and he took my wife's iPhone and our detailed history that we'd kept of every reaction, every photo of everything, wrote it all down into his notes and said, right, let's get a heel prick test for you. And then we got the diagnosis. He didn't ask us any questions because we had we'd already done the work. And I thought to myself, one day that £20 heel prick test will be something that I can get myself by doing something on my phone that says, keep track of it yourself, go to a local pharmacy, show them your evidence, they'll do the heel prick test, and then I can go and get my EpiPens, and then the NHS can give me a diagnosis at a later stage. What I needed was the EpiPens. What I needed was the badge from the NHS that says, take this person seriously. That could have been a very different experience, and it could have been done without 10 appointments, clogging up the NHS for things that actually they could have done something with. So that would be my big leap, would be saying, invest in the infrastructure, give everyone real baseline tools, and that everyone includes citizens who could be a massive workforce for the NHS. We already are. So we need to be treated that way, and we need to be given the assets and tools to help everyone out.
Thanks, Champ. Now, John, you mentioned the Christie Commission, which in all of my time in here, 10 years in here, continually comes up as a very, very high standard document that we haven't properly adopted. Now, we know that the third sector organisations have a much greater reach into those communities that are hardest to reach. So can I ask you how community-led approaches can reshape the future of preventative care in Scotland, and what role you think these grassroots organisations should play in driving long-term health outcomes?
Thanks very much. Good question. Charles' point about the importance of mobilising, in a way, a bigger workforce, voluntary workforce, and I see myself as one of those people, is not the easiest of things to do. And for small and medium-sized charities, if you look at the funding of those charities, you will see that they get about 4% of all the public money going into charities. Some, like 20,000 organisations, get about 4%, and 96% goes to the large national charities. And I'm not having a go at the large national charities, but the fact of life and a lot of the evidence now shows that when you want to bring about change in neighbourhoods, not big communities, but in neighbourhoods, if you've got a good solid base of small and medium charities, you make a very big difference. And we're losing charities in Scotland. You will have seen some of the headlines over the last few days. We're losing charities very quickly. So the chance to influence the future rather than being the future is actually diminishing. And that is really worrying because all the charity that disappears, and there's a few have just put in their tuppence worth in the newspaper articles saying, quite worryingly, we're an award-winning charity. We're doing great stuff. They're centres of excellence. And we've got that experience in Scottish communities. Then they're gone. They can't survive. When we got the funding, I told you, from Nicola Sturgeon, a couple of the Healthy Living Centres said, we're too far gone to use that now, so we can't survive. What are we going to do about that? How are we going to keep our base? And while I respect all the comments on new technology, where I sit, and I'm a board member of a local charity, as you have been, that's not the highest priority for them. It's a survival mode, and the needs are increasing dramatically. And we need to do something pretty fundamentally different to change that around and genuinely influence the future. And a lot of what that influence would be would reflect Christie's pillars, you know, the 4 Ps in Christie. So, you know, it's not rocket science, and it's not even very strong technical science. It's about understanding how the world works in neighbourhoods and communities. I mean, genuinely understanding, not making guesses about it, but understanding how communities are working and recognising that communities are not all the same. There is no one answer to all the communities. In Rutherglen and Cambuslang, where the charity I am part of works, we've identified 37 neighbourhoods in Rutherglen and Cambuslang, all of them different. And we need to have, and we're working on this, we need to have champions in each of those neighbourhoods who come together, talk about the needs, look where the collective needs are, look where the individual needs are, and shape what we do in the charity to meet those needs. And I have to say, a lot of the stuff over the last 16 years, which was including hopeful signs like the community empowerment bills, have gone over the top of these small and medium charities. They've not had that impact. They've not had, in some cases, no impact. And that is also very worrying. We need to make sure that folk like yourself, Brian, and I'm sure you're on the ball, but there's a lot of your colleagues are not aware of what a world in some of our poorest neighbourhoods looks like. And I think we need to genuinely get that understanding. And there's a terrific Scottish Community Development Centre report that came out some time ago called Understanding a Community-Led Approach to Improving Health Improvement. It's a great report. It's detailed. It gives the rationale. If you like the more academic approach, there's bits of that there, but it's common sense in there. And again, it's like a tipping point that hasn't tipped. Christie is a tipping point that didn't tip. Yeah. And that's awful. And we're not a big country. I mean, it's not beyond our ken to be able to do these things. And we have terrific people. We've got 89 organisations bursting with energy, enthusiasm, and worry.
Thank you, John. Now, Alison, what was really interesting about your initial comments was how you're defining or linking the economy with preventable health and employment strategies, and you know, I think in Scotland we have high levels of economic inactivity, and if you look at those stats, a lot of that sits within health. That economic inactivity sits because of health reasons, and if we look at the comparatively across sort of Europe at least, we sit very high on that economic inactivity. So how can future policy interventions more effectively align preventative healthcare with economic and employment strategies to create that lasting reduction in health inequalities that we all seek?
I think it goes precisely back to what John and Margaret have been talking about, which is the sense of joining up different approaches across areas of government. At a community level, at a data level, if we look at all of Scotland, like I said, we've got some issues with our survey data. Years of funding cuts to the ONS, some pretty bad choices, and lowered response rates means that our employment data isn't very good or reliable. So we do know that we have hundreds and thousands of people who are not in work who are working aged. We know that a lot of those people are in poor health. We know that a lot of those people also want to be in work and can't access it for one reason or another. What we don't know is the volume of any of those numbers really reliably, and we don't know what we can be doing through the data. What are those barriers to work? Why do these people who want work not access it, or why can't they access it? But I'm a data person. There's also a lot of people working in communities who can answer these questions. People who work in local authorities, who are in employability services, who talk to people every day, who come to them with probably similar problems, because when you're in a community, a lot of people will experience the same sort of circumstances. It might be the case that people in ill health in one area can't access work because the transport system is not timely enough, favorable enough, or a comfortable distance from where they live. What is an employability service to do about that? If that person is going to the employability service and saying, I really want a job, but I can't physically get there, or I really want a job, but I can't physically get my child to childcare, how's the employability service supposed to handle that? How's the employability service supposed to help a person into work? So this move towards joined up approaches, which the Christie Commission proposed 15 years ago, and which new policy documents are coming out with recently, trying to make this push. Is this happening? Are we joining these up? Are people working in employability able to talk to people working in health, able to talk to people working in transport, childcare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Or are we living in a world where all these organizations are siloed and each community level organization feels powerless to help people that need specific things in their community? So.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now, it's your turn. What we're going to do, if you have a question, please put your hand up, and if you could wait for a mic to get to you. And I'm really hoping for lots of questions, otherwise I have to speak a lot, and we really don't want that. So if you try and keep your questions concise, if you could, and to the point, and we'll get as many in as we possibly can. Well, the mic's on that way down there, so do you want to give? I was, well, there's one each side. Right, you go down that back and you go down that way into the back there. And whoever gets there first gets to answer the question first. Yes, sir.
Hi there. Thanks very much, and thank you for all your comments so far. It's really interesting from a charities perspective. We're one of the big national charities, so sorry about that. But we recently had a tussle with the Edinburgh Integrated Joint Board on this exact topic of early intervention and prevention, and those officers accepted these arguments that this sort of work that they fund saves money, but we struggled to evidence that. And that's the key problem. A lot of these charities and folk in the room working in this sector are able to do is generate that data. In the Scottish Government's public reform strategy, Workstream 6 is specifically trying to tackle this problem, and I'm really interested in what the panel think about how you tackle this from a public accounting perspective. If you give me 2 million and I can prove through survey data that I'm saving your NHS 100 million, say, what more evidence do you need as decision makers to make that reality?
Well, I'm going to turn to you, John. And an addendum to that is, one of the issues I think they face is how do you prove the money you don't spend?
This is a minefield. It is a minefield, and the whole business of the accountability of the community, voluntary and social enterprise sector is an area where they are under the most heavy scrutiny of any part of the health and well-being system. I'll talk about Healthy and Happy Community Development Trust in Rutherglen and Cambuslang. Last year, they put in, I think something, what was it last year? 45 grant applications. The amount of time that went into that is crazy time. And they reckon, I've just read a very interesting wee report. Here we are, still got more visual aids. A bit called Underfunded and Overlooked, 2024. And it talks about what's happening to the small and medium charities. And it's kind of saying that when they did their survey, they've done a lot of research with the small, medium organisations, that the amount of time they spend on making applications for grants occupies about 30 to 40% of their time. And so if you look at the stats in there and it says, well, that sector gets, let's say, 1.2 billion over a year, right? 800,000 of that is spent, or more sometimes, on doing activities to generate the rest of the money. And that's not helpful in terms of producing services to local people. But it's a fact of life there. And I've forgotten the question you asked me.
If it helps at all, so have I.
Well, let's answer any question that we think was there. But the financial side of it, I think, is from our friend up the back from a large charity. Large charities, and you'll come back at me on this, have staff. Generally have staff, and they may, even if they're large enough, have whole departments for their fundraising. And can spend a lot of money on it. And if you're like me, your post every morning has more please donate, please donate, please donate. And it's always lovely, it's glossy and it's well produced and all of that. The small, medium charities don't have that luxury. They just don't have that luxury. But I'll make my very last point here. There is a huge economic as well as social benefit from these small and medium charities. The DTAS in Scotland, what am I talking about here? The Community Development Trust Scotland did a pilot about a couple of years ago on inspecting the economic benefits of community development trusts in their community. And they looked at, we had them in Healthy and Happy with 5 inspectors, Scottish Government inspectors, for a week in the charity looking at what impact we have. They spoke to everyone. In fact, I think they started talking to the cats, but they were so thorough. And the outcome of that was, this is something amazing here. It was that this charity produces so many volunteers and not produces them, engages with so many volunteers who then get training. A lot of them got qualifications through our Bike Time project and through our local radio station. They went on to get jobs, and the volunteers became active economically in their community. And at the same time, Healthy and Happy at that time employed something like 30 staff. So we were one of the biggest employers in Rutherglen. So, you know, there's a huge impact of these kinds of organisations which is never fully realised. So, you know, I don't know how we're going to get that. Well, I do. I've waved the blueprint around.
I would also endorse the impact, the positive health implications of volunteering. And sometimes that's forgotten. And I remembered what the question was, and we'll come back to it. Okay. Which was, how do you quantify what you don't spend, what you save? So another question from the floor, the gentleman there, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, really interesting discussion, and I suppose my question links in a bit with the gentleman's over there, because I was thinking more from the perspective of, we've been working since Christie in a system where there's a lot of good prevention activity taking place, but it's within a system which is fundamentally about fairly short-term annual performance, meeting targets, very service-specific, organisation-specific. We're talking a bit about how we can do prevention more, but is there not also an issue about how do we really stoke up the imperative for prevention? The fact is that there's some fairly striking statistics out there that show the cost of not investing in prevention in terms of, well, for instance, the Mental Health Foundation estimates an £8.8 billion annual cost of mental health problems to the Scottish economy. That's work they did with the London School of Economics. The Hard Edges Scotland report estimated a £900 million annual total excess financial cost of healthcare from people who have been homeless. You know, these are really stark figures, and it maybe helps to get into the question of how do you assess the benefits, the savings from prevention if you're starting more from health boards and other public services really understanding actually where are our future cost and demand projections, where are we going to be in 10 years' time, how well are we on track to meet those future needs and demands, and just measuring it on how they're performing in that year will not give you that. We don't have the evidence yet to tell us that.
I'm really glad you mentioned the Mental Health Foundation. I can recommend their Food for Thought document that I read an awful lot. Now, Margaret, I knew this would be for you.
So I think there's several points to that. I mean, first thing I want to say is that within Public Health Scotland, we've done some work looking at projecting what we think the burden of disease will be, which also relates to demand on health and care and lots of other services over the next 20 years. And just because the population is ageing, which is just because we've got the baby boomer cohort and there's fewer births, because the population is ageing, we're expecting a 21% increase in the burden of disease if we can't reduce the burden at each age. So it's really, I think we've really got a very strong imperative from just financial and service pressure point of view, apart from the human point of view, that we definitely want to reduce ill health and poor well-being in the population. So I think that really gives us the imperative. In Scotland, Scottish Government has just published what's called the Population Health Framework, which hopefully some of you might have seen, and it's exactly what it said. It's a paper that is how to improve population health in Scotland, and it is very much about taking a preventative focus. So overarching all of it is taking a sort of preventive approach across all actions, but it's looking at social and economic factors. It's looking at place and physical activity. It's looking at health-related behaviours, addressing commercial determinants of poor eating, physical activity, substances, that kind of thing, as well as looking at the NHS. So it's very much exactly those sort of things that I talked about right at the beginning, the building blocks. It is looking at those, and that really, I think, gives us a mandate to work at national and local level to see what is it that we can do jointly to really make a difference to prevention. We know the pressures, we know it's only going to get worse. We need to work together and really invest in all of these building blocks that we know are going to make a difference in the longer term. So I think we have a very strong argument, but it's up to all of us to do it. It's up to all of us to use whatever levers we have in whatever positions we're in to do that. Within public health, people quite often say to me, but you work in economy and transport, and as a public health person, what on earth do you know about those? And they're quite right. I'm not an economist, unlike Alison. I'm not a transport specialist, but I do lots of work on health and transport. But it's very much about working. There's a bit of rather horrible public health jargon for it, which is called health in all policies. And it's about how can me as a public health person, how can I work with economists, with transport planners, with spatial planners, with housing colleagues on what they're doing and make sure that jointly we can get the best outcomes for health, because everybody wants good health and reduced health inequalities. It is a shared thing that is a really strong value in Scotland, so we've all got an interest in it. So I think the Population Health Framework gives us that mandate and quite a good framework to do that, but we really need to make sure that we keep pushing upstream, and we make sure that we really do sort of capitalise on that.
I'm going to come to you in a minute, Alison, but I know Chal, I wanted the question probably to both of you from a different perspective here is how does technology and how does data collection, how can that help to drive this change in approach?
So there's a kind of boiling frog problem here, which is for us all collectively, this won't be the case for some people, most deprived areas and things like that will absolutely not feel like this, but collectively, it doesn't hurt bad enough, quick enough as a system. It's just an ever increasing, getting worse feeling. It's not sharp enough, and so we don't treat it as an emergency. And at the risk of re-traumatizing us all, reasonably recently, there was something that was sharp enough and extreme enough, that was COVID. And we acted very differently in those circumstances. And like or love any of the different positions or policy decisions or anything that happened in that, I've spent my entire career trying to create a national vaccine system. 20 years. Got nowhere near. We did that in like 80 days. We just did it. And every single nurse and an army of volunteers who trained to be vaccinators popped up shop in every single bit of the system. And we got 3/4 of the population vaccinated in record time with an IT system that created a single national record, which had everyone's status, that linked to every GP system and every hospital system. And the citizen could log into themselves to see their proof, and they could take that with them and use it to show to an employee or a care home manager or whatever they needed to do to use their own data for their own benefit. And I look at that and I go, we can absolutely do it. Wouldn't it be great to do that for child vaccinations? Thinking about prevention at scale. Unfortunately, you kind of get to the end of that kind of period and we don't quite grab the opportunity because we had all that infrastructure. It kind of just gets dismantled again, During the pandemic, my team were building those systems for test result communication and contact tracing and stuff like that. And I remember vividly sitting down with public health consultants during it saying, do you think we're going to be able to hold on to this stuff? In Scotland, we detect about, I think it's something like 45% of the high blood pressure population. In Canada, it's 90%. And they do that through community engagement, through a kind of non-medical model. And we thought to ourselves, God, imagine if we could, but high blood pressure kills more people than COVID did every year, routinely. How can you bottle that energy and say that's a bigger crisis? How do we get everyone to get used to the idea that they can go into a local pharmacy or a leisure centre or a library, get a quick blood pressure check done, get a bit of guidance, and then go join a walking club? How do you make that state of an emergency, and how do you get all the resources and the people and to say, let's just do it, Anyway, so that's my plea. It's like, I think you need to create that bottled energy, and it has to feel acute enough that we can kind of, dare I say, discard a lot of the normal stuff that gets in the way of us just doing it.
Where does lack of data collection fit into all of this?
I think data is a bit of a double-edged sword. I think, you know, we have a lot of data. We have a lot of really good data. We have a lot of really bad data, and we have a lot of data that we just don't know how to use or how to access or where it is, or it's behind walls, or it's kept in some random dusty corner. Or one guy holds it and he doesn't really like it when you access it, so he's not going to give you permission.
I know that guy.
Yeah, we all do, it sounds like. So one of the things that ends up happening is sometimes it's hard to, you know, see the forest through the trees. It's hard to put all these pieces together. It's hard to know where does a real problem lie. Without good data, that problem becomes even harder. I think one of the problems that we also have is I'm what would be called a quantitative researcher. I have an undergraduate degree in mathematics. I love sitting at my computer, ticking away. That's great. I'll sit in a spreadsheet for hours. I have colleagues that are what are called qualitative researchers. So they do work in the field. They are talking to people. They're conducting experiments or research, you know, with people in the community. And for me, that's not something that I like doing, but it is something that I think is so unbelievably valuable and so understated. You know, I think John, I could probably, if we were to talk about what people in Rutherglen need in order to access work, I'm sure that you could tell me much quicker than I could. I live 4 miles away and I have access to that data right in front of me all the time, but I don't think that, you know, in a lot of cases, data can supersede the information that you can get from working in communities and actually talking to people and conducting this sort of qualitative experiences. You really kind of need both of these to inform each other to understand, well, what direction do I take the data in? Okay, well, what is John saying about what's going on in Rutherglen? Okay, can I look for evidence of that in the data that we have? What data do we have? Where is that data? Without the two, you can't really get anywhere. Without the two together, you really need both sides to.
I could give an example of that. This is the original question from the large charity person, which is local leisure centres get commissioned by NHS all the time to run wellbeing schemes for prevention, weight management and pre-diabetes, these sorts of things. Those leisure centres struggle to get recommissioned by NHS because they can't demonstrate impact in the way the NHS needs to see it. The NHS holds all the data about the impact. The leisure centre holds none of the data about the impact, but they can collect qualitative information about the improved well-being and the way that the community feels about it, and that's all good, and they present that qualitative evidence to the NHS that then goes, yeah, but there's still, we don't know if there's fewer admissions to hospital, so no thanks. But it's only the NHS who has that data. So how is the leisure centre meant to put forward that case for change?
Absolutely. Lady at the front here.
Yeah, I think that's hit the nail on the head, is it's the qualitative data that's needed, which was John demonstrated with 5 people coming and speaking to people. And well-being is subjective. So what well-being scales are being used as opposed to GDP? And it's great having policies. It makes it sound as if things are going to be great. But a lot of those policies do not get carried through, or there isn't the substance underneath those policies, the structure underneath the policies to carry them through. I'm thinking of the dementia strategy, and I take your point about employment, I take your point about in the longer term, children being the future, but there's also the elderly population, and that is one thing that Scotland needs to deal with, is to keep older people healthy.
Yeah, I'm getting there. Margaret, tell us about the scale of well-being.
Oh gosh, yes. Well, of course, well-being, you're right, is a subjective concept, but there are scales for well-being. So there's you probably know about WEMWEB, the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale, which lots of people use, and it's a really useful scale, I think, for getting a good idea of whether the population's well-being is above average or below, you know, if it's going in the right direction or not. So we do have scales like that. they're not always routinely collected in all the places that you'd want them. That's one of the issues. But I think the thing that I really agreed with you on was when you said it's about, we're very good at measuring GDP, which is a kind of abstract thing, isn't it? It's just about, but whether there's more trade in society, and it could be trade in good things or it could be trade in bad things. But we use that as a overarching measure when we should be using the well-being of the population. And we have frameworks for that. We have the National Performance Framework, which has got indicators. We could use that much more, I think, as a measure of whether as a society we're doing better or worse. We could use things like WMEBS more. I think it needs a kind of package of different indicators, which a bit like the National Performance Framework, but others, and to use that much more as overall as a country, are things going in the right direction or the wrong direction, and not just look at GDP, but look at a much broader range of things. And I think it's also about understanding how what we do in health affects what happens in education. What happens in education has a big impact on health. We tend to take these kinds of indicators and attach them to one sector and say, it's only in education that you can affect educational attainment. Well, that's rubbish, isn't it? The NHS makes a big difference, the environment makes a big difference, housing makes a big difference. So it's understanding that all of those different policy areas all contribute to all of those outcomes. And so we need to look at them collectively and understand them collectively. And that is part of the mindset shift I think I was talking about.
You got something to add to that, John?
A thought that came to me from your comment was that we're marvellous at bureaucratising. Absolutely marvellous at it. And my background in education, I can't remember the number of times that we've had a new set of national outcomes for kids in schools. We've gone into curriculum for excellence, so nobody knows quite what direction that's going. But we've had, all these different surges of interest in measuring stuff. And, a lot of the time it goes nowhere. And in fact, I remember, this is going back a wee bit, the government minister in charge of education said, I'm going to put my job on the line here. We will have, on the basis of these national performance indicators, when they turned out a bit wonky, they just disappeared. Meanwhile, all the schools had geared themselves up to collect data on these things. And it just takes away from the core activity, all of that. And, sorry, going back to Christie again, but Christie was the first time I read about failure demand. And failure demand, your example is a terrific example of that a lot of current services use a large percentage of their funding to deal with failure demand. Failure demand basically is people coming, you don't get it right first time with them, and they have to go somewhere else. They're passed on to this person, that person, and whatever person, and it just uses a lot of time and energy. So we need to be very wary, I think, of the whole business of accountability and measuring as though it's good. We didn't do it during COVID. There was this other great principle of trust. And we need to develop that real strong sense of trust between all the partners involved. I don't think they are all partners, by the way, but all the people, all the organisations involved in trying to improve health. Unless we feel trust, it's not there. It's just not there. And we need to do something about that because it would reduce the bureaucracy to a minimum.
Young lady at the front here. This lady here. With the glasses on there.
Thank you. I thought it was very interesting that you mentioned, obviously, that the social economic impact has got the highest impact on inequalities. And I wondered what the panel would think about things like universal basic income, because I think in terms of employment issues that you mentioned as well, I think it's quite complicated, isn't it, to try and, I absolutely agree, obviously work gives people all kinds of good things. Depends what kind of work, depends what kind of conditions. And we have this horrible mantra of, you know, hard-working families that used to come out from the Labour government years ago, all the time, although people that weren't hard-working were not worth anything. So I think the stigma around unemployment and people who are not in work is high. And if it's done harshly, as it has been done, actually, to try and get people into work, whatever, it would make people iller. But I think the universal basic income idea has been shown to be quite different. It gives people a level of income, if it's properly done, at a higher level they can manage on just about. It's not high. They can look after people. They can become carers happily. They have less insecurity, which I think does affect their health. And they can develop their own kind of interest into getting better work. And of course, the impact of that reduces poorly paid work because people don't have to take these rotten jobs. So I just wondered what you think about universal basic income.
Well, that's yours. Sorry, Alison, that's you.
No, I think universal basic income is a very interesting concept, and I know it. You know, it's been trialed, and it's so expensive, and it's fraught, and does it work? Doesn't it work? Does it drive inflation? Does that, you know, £1,000 a month go to £0 a month? Because now, you know, it's a really complicated topic. I think a lot of times for fiscal responsibility, it's good to have things that are means tested, by which I mean less of a universal basic income, but more of like I think what we've called is like a minimum income standard. So rather than blanket giving everyone, you know, £1,000 or whatever, it's ensuring that everyone has access to this amount of money. With things like universal credit and stuff, like, could that be more generous to push in that direction? Well, don't want to, I mean, probably, maybe. But there are bigger issues with it, right? There's issues where when you're on some of these universal credit programs, you know, you've got this 5-6 week waiting period before you're able to get it. So that gives you this very long period where you're going without money. Also, if you earn a little bit too much last month, then suddenly this month, you're not going to be able to access the amount of money that you had previously, which means, you know, maybe you picked up 2 extra shifts last month, and now this month you're really, really struggling. So there's that argument for, you know, minimum income standard, universal basic income. There's also an argument for just making the social programs that we have in play currently work better for people and make it so that things are easier to access through the systems that we currently have. Because we do have the ability to give people money. We do have robust, you know, social programs. We do have money that exists for people to have. But because of all these barriers to get it, because of these long wait times, because of these, you know, issues with consistency, what ends up doing is kind of, on occasion, you know, if anecdotally people say, like, that if they're going to have to take a risk going into work, they're not going to do it, because if they try to go into work and then that fails, next month they're going to be completely broke, because next month they won't have access to the universal credit that they're used to this month. People are risk averse. Why would you go into work knowing that if something goes wrong, you're going to be in a much worse off position than you were previously? So things like that can make the system a little bit more generous, probably, more responsive, and fairer and easier to access is probably, you know, the first step in that direction. Again, so that people aren't feeling like going into work is too big of a risk to suffer. So people aren't feeling like if something goes wrong, they're going to be left destitute until things pick back up. And so people aren't put in these positions where they're waiting, you know, unfair lengths of time to get access to the money that they need to survive.
Charlie, you want to step into this one?
Yeah, so not my area of expertise at all, but from what we've gleaned from research that we've done, you know, a lot of this is culture dependent. So I can't speak to universal basic income directly, but there are countries where they have very generous systems when you're out of work. You've lost your job, and you can get, in some cases, a year or 2 years of almost equalized pay from what you were last being paid on. You know, and there are no, in some countries, there are no conditions for that. You just get it, and then a year or two later, you stop getting it, and then you go down to a lower rate. And in some countries, that then has been paired with a culture where everyone wants to be productive. I wouldn't say everyone wants to work, because that's a slightly different kind of thing. And so it doesn't necessarily follow that people then just sit there for 2 years getting paid for nothing. The evidence shows they go back into work quite quickly because they want to be productive. So, you know, I don't know how that fits inside of a broader economic model around universal basic income as a base policy and social thing. But I would say that a lot of people want to contribute, and a lot of the benefits of work are contributing. You want to contribute, and everyone around you socially wants you to contribute too, and you feel pressure from everyone around you to contribute, and there's a kind of social contract around contribution. Universal basic income would make volunteering easier, and you can create other forms of contribution that give people purpose, keep them healthy, keep other people healthy, support unpaid care and other things in a better way. So that's all me speaking out of position as someone who doesn't really know about this stuff. That's my opinion. The thing I do know is almost all of the best and brightest innovations and inventions come when people are afforded the safe space to create. Google Mail was a mistake. So Google didn't say, one day we're going to have Google Mail. It was on a free day that they gave an employee to do whatever they want. Boom, billions of pounds worth of revenue, right? So what I would say is, as an innovation centre person, that the freedom, the safety to be able to experiment and be entrepreneurial is part of what universal basic income could offer. I don't know what the effect of that is on an economy, but you know, it's just one thing to consider.
Margaret.
I agree with what's been said. I mean, I think it's really important to say that having a decent income, enough money to live on, is the most basic of the building blocks that we definitely should aspire for everybody in Scotland to have. And if they haven't, that's really shocking, isn't it? So I think whether it's universal basic income or minimum income guarantee or whatever, we need to make sure that our system allows everybody at least enough income to live on, whatever the mechanisms are for that. And I think I would be agnostic about exactly what mechanisms there might be, but we need to make sure we do that. And I think it's also important to know that of the children that are living in poverty in Scotland, about a quarter of all children are living in poverty, and 2/3 of those live in a household where at least one person is working. So at the moment, work is not necessarily paying enough for everyone. So I think there's something wrong with our system when that is the current situation. And those are the kinds of issues which we really have to address if we want to have better health for the whole population of Scotland.
Yes, sir. Gentleman down the check shirt.
I found the conversation very interesting, but I'd like to try and move it in a different direction, if I may. So it says innovations to prevent poor health. Poor diet and lack of exercise are key drivers of poor health. I'll be very keen to hear from each of the panelists of an innovation at an individual level that could be rapidly, as has been suggested, generated to get us all improving our diet and getting fitter.
Well, an easy one then, okay. Charles.
This is the question So that innovation is here. A lot of people won't necessarily like it. People heard of GLP-1 medications, so these are the new weight loss drugs that are coming out. With my public health hat on, I'm torn because they are devastatingly effective at reducing someone's risk factors for all sorts of things. They will reduce your appetite, and they will make it for most people, some people don't respond to it, they will make it for most people extremely easy to lose weight, to get to a healthy BMI effectively. Now that's only one component of well-being clearly. It suppresses your appetite. Some people report that it kind of reduces the joy in life a bit. to be on it. So you have to think about that. If you don't combine it with weight training, resistance training, physical exercise, you're going to lose a lot of lean body mass. Are we cooking the next generation of predominantly women going into their 70s with lower lean body mass and bone density because we've helped them rapidly lose weight using medical sort of intervention? So a whole bunch of public stuff going on there. But undeniably, the whole country is kind of going, right, we probably need 40% of the population to be using these medications at some point in the next 2 or 3 years. The problem is how do you distribute that at scale in a safe, governed way? Don't make eating disorders worse. Don't cause risk and harm to people. Don't create those long-term public health effects on people going into old age and other things like that. There are pharmacological improvements that will modify the side effects and make it so you don't lose as much lean body mass. And there's medical fixes to some of that. But but through none of that process is someone learning good behaviors. They're not learning how to sustain. They're not learning how to do any of the things that you would want to in a normal sort of well-being and lifestyle type behavior change exercise. So now are we going to give everyone these weight loss drugs at a minimal dose for the rest of their lives? Maybe. In the next couple of years, they'll come in pill form, not injection. And we could be treating them in the same way we treat statins now. Oh, okay, so you've gotten to this risk strata. All right, here's your pill. So that's the sexy stuff, because there are things like that. And when more and more drugs come onto the market that are tailored to your genes and therapies that tailor to your genes, we'll get increasing amounts of these sorts of interventions. Another one that's coming through, it's in animal trials at the moment, is a pill that will trick your body into effectively thinking that you've been weight training. So you will become more muscular by taking a pill without going to the gym or doing anything particularly, right? So in 20 years' time, am I going to be saying to my son, I've been going to the gym for 30 years and you already look bigger than me? How? So there's a whole bunch of stuff that we can't really expect from that. So there are lots of innovations of that nature that will absolutely be transformative. But the things that are right in front of us right now are, how do we do that in a trustworthy, ethical, culturally appropriate way that doesn't leave people behind, that doesn't create adverse public health outcomes in other areas? And the other challenge of today is, how do we get that done? It's not the cost of the drugs. It's the fact that at the moment you need 6 GP appointments to titrate the medication. Someone has to prescribe it. Someone has to look at your clinical records to see and make sure you don't have an eating disorder and various other sorts of things. How do we do that? How do we do that for 40% of the population when GPs are already stretched to breaking? So we're going to have to come up with different ways of doing that. That might involve leisure centres and community pharmacies and drop-in clinics. Picture what we did for COVID. So we might need to come up with the machinery, the people power, unfortunately some bureaucracy, to do that at scale. So does that answer your kind of question? Is that the kind of stuff you were looking for?
Big answer. I was just sort of, here's something, bosh.
Okay, can I?
Just pull it, because I think...
It's not my role as convener to step in and have an opinion, but I'm gonna. Innovation's got there's many forms of innovation. And looking across the world, we can learn from other people. So here's an innovation for you. Japan has 4% obesity. And the big innovation that they didn't include technology. It doesn't include what we would class as innovation. They decided that every school would have a nutritionist. Okay? And they are the 3rd biggest economy in the world, and it's always the big economies that tend to have the obesity problem. And we are not Japan. What that tells me is, if there is political will to solve a problem, there are ways of solving a problem that do not medicalise the situation. Because as soon as you, what we should be looking at is, why did 40% of the population become obese in the first place? Anybody like to comment and shoot me down?
No, I'm not shooting you down. No, not yet. But, that future that you've just described, oh, I'm glad I'm getting old. Anyway, the Welsh Government quite recently, last year, year before and last year, took a big decision to do a national framework for social prescribing in Wales. Now, I wouldn't know much about that apart from the fact that our organisation got a grant about 6 years ago from the lottery to run a major social prescribing programme in Scotland. It was called Spring Social Prescribing. And I have to say the evaluation for that was really, really positive, and it's available online on our website to see it, and it uses a lot of the well-being scales and so on. It's all that data's there, as well as very powerful case studies. But you know, the whole thing about the point you're making, I think, and we've seen this in practice, is if you take a holistic view of an individual, you don't just say, oh, overweight, right? Oh, a bit physically out of condition, right? No. You talk with them. And talking and connecting is almost the core of nearly all of these sorts of things. And you work through a social prescription that takes them down a road that they like, because they've been involved in putting it together, and it makes a difference. And we have lots of evidence now from that 5-year programme that it does make lots of difference, and the Welsh Government are finding already in their national scheme, and we have a tentative proposal in Scotland to have a national framework for social prescribing. I have a worry about that, and my worry is back to the bureaucratising stuff, that it becomes some sort of, I don't know, mechanical process that you go through. That's no use. It's no use. And it's not signposting, as a lot of folk think of social prescribing. It's signposting. And I have to say, one of our tipping points and our excitement was about the introduction of the community link workers across Scotland. And then we had a worry, because we worried about the methods that we're using in some of the areas, which turned out to be signposting. And they signpost them to the charities in the area, the small and medium charities, who get no resource for responding to that. And of course, the number of referrals went up and up, because they have no resource themselves to deal with that. And it's a community that has to deal with that. But social prescribing has to be managed really carefully, and the ethos of it and the culture of it has to be dead right, or it's not doing its job. So that would be, and that's nearly, it's not quite a silver bullet, but it's as near, I think, as we can get to that, because it's very straightforward. Well, it's not. But I was going to say it's straightforward to introduce, but you should have seen the battles we went through with GPs about that, you know, and getting them on board.
It would be significantly cheaper and more simple to implement than what I just described.
Yeah.
It would be infinitely cheaper to not have them obese in the first place.
Listen, Matt, can I, sorry, just one last wee thing.
We're on one now, right?
Right. When we started with 10 of our organisations on Spring Social Prescribing, before we even started, we got each of them in their own areas, on their own communities, to get a group of people together and float the idea of social, because nobody knew what social prescribing was about. So float the idea with them, come back to us and see what they thought about the idea. And I have to say, I've still got all the responses from the questionnaires and the discussion groups that happened. But the teenagers that were in it were something else. And they were saying, if I went to the doctor and came back and I didn't get any pills, my ma would kill me. You know, so it was about that understanding. What is it going to do?
Margaret.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I mean, I'm GLP, they're not my area of expertise at all. My gut sort of reaction as a public health person is absolute horror at that, at what you described.
Just to be clear, I'm not endorsing it. That was me just describing what's happening. You know.
But I think it's important that when something like that, when we're bringing in, we really do look at what are the implications of this. You know, the cost implications for services, and the long-term implications that you talked about for individuals' health. And it's nearly always better, exactly as Brian said, to prevent things before they happen. So I think even if we were bringing in much greater use of obesity medication, we also need a food system that is not making people obese in the first place. And there are technologies that can help with that as well. There's things like microbial foods that have got much higher nutritional content. There are things that we could do within the food system, and physical activity. You mentioned physical activity, which has been described as the best value in public health. I think it has lots of value, not just about obesity, but much more than that. And that is about the environment, the environments that we have that allow people to walk and cycle, for example. We all saw, we've mentioned the pandemic too many times, but we all saw what happened during the pandemic when there was no traffic on the roads. Suddenly lots of bicycles appeared and people were cycling and walking much more than they had before, and that's because the environment was much more pleasant and much safer for them to do that. So we really need environments that allow people to be physically active, and that means really prioritising active travel, and then public transport, because public transport keeps cars off the road, reduces the amount of traffic, and people do get a meaningful amount of physical activity just by walking to the bus or the train as part of their journey. So it's really using, in Scotland we have what's called the sustainable transport hierarchy, which places walking and cycling at the top, and then public transport, and then shared transport and private car use at the bottom. And that's what the policy says. It's not what you see around you at the moment, but we really need much stronger policies to achieve that. For physical activity and lots of other, I mean, one of the sort of benefits of taking what we call a health in all policies approach is we understand that all of these different things will affect health in lots of different ways. So that would benefit physical activity, would reduce the number of injuries on the roads, it would reduce community severance, lots of different ways in which that would benefit health. So we really need to look at the environments, and maybe that's alongside the medication and the individual interventions. But ignoring the environments means that we're really just stacking up more problems in the future.
I say, ladies and gentlemen, what a brilliant discussion. And we're just getting into it there now. I'm getting wickedly signposted to say your time's up. But before we allow this fantastic panel to go, I'm going to allow them a minute to sum up thoughts for the day. Can I start with you, Alison, your thoughts on this discussion?
It's gone all over the place. I think that the last bit was quite interesting, though, because it is about innovation, isn't it? And I think at the simplest, a lot of the things that we're talking about are not innovations. They're things that already exist, that we already have access to. For me, I'm 100% on Margaret's page. You know, if we want people to be moving more, we need to look at the environments. And looking at the environment, you know, I live in East Glasgow. I don't know. It's not always the nicest place in the entire world. And if you wonder why people in Glasgow aren't getting out and moving, you can walk around my neighbourhood for about 10 minutes and figure it out. And really just the fundamental bit of it is, can we clean up the streets a little bit? Can we make it so that people have the time and the money and the ability to access leisure activities, and the time and money to access work, and the ability to get from point A to point B? Can we take care of people a little bit better using the systems that we already have, you know?
John.
Oh, 1 minute. I would like to see that title of that report, the underfunded and overlooked, reversed. I would like to think that we could come back in another 5 years and not be able to produce a report like that. That would be good. And on the back of that as well, I'd love to see our blueprint implemented, but also in a broader sense, the introduction of a social model of health across Scotland that would be complementary to the NHS, but would be well funded, consistently funded, and value the role of individuals and communities to improve health.
Ciao.
So we said innovation in the title. Our definition of innovation, we kind of use the word invention and innovation interchangeably sometimes in the way people talk. Invention is the thing where you're doing something brand new that no one else has ever done before. Innovation is usually applying a thing that's been invented at a scale and changing the way things work because of it. So innovation has to be applied. So we've invented tons of stuff. We haven't applied at scale most of the things that we invent. So if we're talking about innovation in its true sense, I would say there are a lot of simple things that we've already heard about that we haven't really done well at scale that we need to. And it's not really some sort of invention that's going to come over the horizon, GLP-1 medication notwithstanding, that comes in and gazumps everything and says, oh, don't worry with all that well-being stuff, you just inject yourself and you'll be fine. It's not as simple as that. And so I think we've got a lot of simple things we need to do better consistently at scale. And I would completely endorse the social side of things. All the weight loss stuff in the world will not make a difference if you haven't bonded with a group of people during a local walking group and created friends that will go on the journey with you and reinforce your decision making and make you feel good about it.
Margaret.
Okay, gosh, 1 minute to sum up the very wide-ranging discussion. I think everybody places a high value on health, on your own health, your family's health, your community's health. And I think it's really important for us collectively, we really need a joined up approach to address those building blocks that I've probably bored you solid with talking about today, because that is how we're going to make the biggest difference to health in Scotland. Over the last 10 years, health in Scotland has been going in the wrong direction. It's been getting worse. And it's because we haven't invested enough in the building blocks. And we haven't really prioritised the building blocks, particularly for the groups of people who are in poverty or have the poorest health. And that's what we need to do if we want to see a difference over the next 10 years. I'm quite hopeful. I think there is much more understanding of that now, and I think there is certainly a will to do that among the people that I work with anyway. Obviously, I see probably a slightly biased group of people, but I think there is much more understanding of that now, but it's really turning that into action, making sure that we do kind of move upstream and stop focusing only on the NHS, but also on the wider system and the impact that that has. I think innovation, I agree with you, lots of different things are innovative, and there's something for me about making sure that we're using innovative ideas and approaches to solve problems rather than sort of looking at the new technology and think, oh, that's really nice and shiny, how can we use it? So there's a need to make sure that we're using it we're sort of starting with a problem that we want to solve and then looking for the solution rather than the other way around. And I think we need much more governance, and that's really tricky at the moment because some of the technology is global and it's come from lots of different places, and we really need much more governance to understand what are the new technologies, new ways of doing things, what are the benefits, but what are the potential harms, and how can we make sure that we do benefit from them? And that applies across all sorts of innovations, definitely not just in healthcare, but across the whole system. But I think fundamentally, people really do value health, and people really do want to improve health and reduce health inequalities. And I think it is just joining together to really achieve that.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think my heart is gladdened that we have people of this calibre, that we can have such a fantastic discussion around health. I mean, I think one of the things that you know, when I'm looking at these things is trying to define what we mean by health. And I think that some of the discussion we've had today, more than food for thought. And I just think that, you know, when we talk about innovation sits at the top table here. So I would like to thank John and Alison and Chal and Margaret for a really insightful discussion today. It's really been excellent, along with the Partner Scotland's Futures Forum. So if we could thank them in the usual manner, if we could. Can I also remind everyone if they could complete the survey using our QR codes or ask one of the festival assistants for a paper copy. Very much appreciate your thoughts on how to improve the festival. And can I take this other opportunity to remind you that there are many more festival events taking place until Friday 22nd, including a discussion on Scotland's drug problem at 3:15 today, followed by a session with the BBC's foreign correspondent and news presenter Clive Myrie at 5:30. And for the rest of the week, we have discussions on the rise of misogyny, an exploration of how we think about the future with social geographer Professor Danny Doring, and a debate on junk versus jabs, our relationship with food. And I do hope you'll be able to join us. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you.